Hello and welcome to the podcast of the Prison Officers Association, Britain's largest professional trade union for staff working in prisons and correctional centres, public and private mental health services trust providers and immigration services, with nearly 35,000 members. In this episode, we look at the relatively new health and safety inspections regime. What has changed since its introduction? How is it having a positive effect on prison culture? And what individual POA members can do to drive the pace of these improvements. Well, listeners, welcome to the POA podcast. And today we're talking about the new health and safety, relatively new health and safety inspections regime. And I'm delighted to have with me Phil Hannant from the NEC, Jackie Marshall, also from the NEC, Roger Moran, relatively new member of the NEC, and a great pleasure to welcome Jason Morley, who's a senior health, safety, fire and litigation manager for HMPPS. So you're all very welcome. I suppose this is a relatively new era of health and safety inspections. It was introduced in 2023-24. What was it like beforehand? Jason, was there a regime? Was it all piecemeal? How did things work or not work?
I mean, I can talk from my part of the world at that time that you got inconsistent engagement, and I think both sides were slightly mistrusting of each other, perhaps at a local level. And I think, therefore, that prevented us taking the joint approach to improving health and safety matters. And that's crucial. My experience has shown me that actually you get nowhere if you don't take your staff with you. And a significant part of that is the representation provided by the trade unions that's enshrined in law. But actually, practically, it just makes sense.
So it was an attempt to try and get some more consistency and therefore to be more effective in the way in which health and safety inspections had been done. Jackie, was the process of reaching agreement on a very comprehensive checklist that's the backbone of this regime? Was it a tough set of negotiations, or were you pleasantly surprised?
No, it wasn't tough to get the checklist done because we have a very good relationship between health and safety from an NEC level and the national HMPPS level. And we do talk regular, so we both sort of know what problems that we have across the establishments and what needs to be made better. So getting agreement on a checklist wasn't too bad, really.
But having the checklist is one thing, and then implementing it is another. Phil, did you find that when it came to that implementation phase, perhaps not everyone was on the same page? Perhaps some establishments were more willing to engage than others?
Yeah, I've experienced on the inspections that I've done, and might I say it, a very small minority, that some governors are a little bit suspicious of this, and we need to sit down and explain that we're not here to criticise. We're not here to criticise their management. We're all working towards what we should be a collective, safe environment. And just throwing a little bit on the previous what Jackie and Jason said, I think over the years it's been kind of acknowledgement that good practice is working together on this. And it varies from jail to jail. Prior to me being on the NEC, I worked on a secondment for 6 months to our health and safety department at HMP Accrington prior to it being privatised to Northumberland, because it was acknowledged from both sides that things weren't right within the jail. Collectively, we worked well together. So my experiences from a local level have always been we have worked well, certainly in the North East.
Roger, from your perspective, how do you think things have changed between the old health and safety regime and the relatively new health and safety inspection regime?
I think certainly with management, it's given it more of a sort of realization that things need to be done. What you're seeing as you go around the estate from our perspective is a bit like the royal visit. You can smell the paint. Whereas before, and even as a branch rep having undertaken them, it very much felt like a sort of tick box exercise. We have to say we've done it. There wasn't really an awful lot of push from management. But to be fair, you can feel the urgency now as you visit establishments from management, and you can feel the need for them to want to do well from the audit to get, the approved mark. And things are being done, which is really positive.
So that's good and helpful to hear, because Jason, I suppose that what the checklist does is it focuses on the areas that are agreed as being most important, the ones that can cause most problems, and therefore, if you don't know what your status is against those risk factors, how can you know that you're on track to mitigate the risk?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really good point made by Phil around it is a small minority and it is mistrust up to a point. Sometimes it comes down to just an individual misunderstanding about what this is about. Fundamentally, it's about having a fresh set of eyes, isn't it? And
Mm.
also having a broad range of people participating. Because if I just go out by myself and look at things, then I'll find the things that I'm expecting to find that are sort of driven by my experience and knowledge, and therefore I won't necessarily pick up everything because I'm only looking from my blinkered perspective, if that makes sense. So actually, having that approach of a fresh set of eyes in a non-critical way, in a constructive way, and we engage at site level with site health and safety teams and then the senior leaders, actually we can enlighten people to what they might be missing. And I think over the period that this has been running, actually you start to see the culture change. I think probably initially there was real fear about what is this and actually how much time is it going to take. And I think the value starting to be seen by senior leaders in the operational arena. They're seeing that what we see, what we find, and what we suggest might be done about it actually makes a lot of sense and helps them to reach greater compliance and actually make things safer. And fundamentally, I don't think there's a governor out there who wants to make things unsafe for people. So I think we get a lot more constructive engagement throughout the process now. And there's some difficult topics, but actually, I think it's seen as a benefit now.
And Roger, you've recently joined the NEC. I think you started your term of office at the beginning of this year. How did your perceptions change from how you viewed the health and safety regime before you took up office and now that you are part of the NEC? Has there been a big difference?
I suppose so, yes, because I think being on the NEC, you're seeing it from a very different angle. I mean, I'm 35 years as a prison officer. Started my career very briefly in Albany, just under 2 years on the Isle of Wight. But most of my time has been spent at my home establishment at Liverpool. And you see health and safety, you see your service through that window of an old Victorian prison. And that to you as an individual is the prison service. Being on the NEC, you see health and safety and the prison service in a very different light across all spectrums, in very different types of establishments. So yeah, looking at health and safety in, for instance, with that in mind, having done a few now, in open prisons, in women's prisons, in a mother and baby unit, it really is a much broader challenge.
Jackie, the checklist runs to 12 pages, although some of them are more heavily populated with questions and data and so on than others. It's a very significant undertaking, these inspections, aren't they? How many have been done? What's the target per year? How do you and Roger and Phil keep up, if you like, with what must be a fairly relentless pressure of work on this?
It is a lot of work, and sometimes it's really difficult to get diaries together with National Health and Safety and HMPPS because their diaries are as busy as ours. So that's probably one of the biggest problems we have with it, but we do muddle through and get there in the end.
The practicalities, how long does an inspection take? How many do you aim to do in a year? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so we aim to do 12 a year if possible, and each one is 2 days at maximum. We have found in some of the smaller establishments we can probably get it done in a day, but the majority of them are 2 days.
Phil, would you share the view that Jason just touched on, that we're starting to see now a cultural change, which really has to be an objective of all this, doesn't it? That at site level, management teams know what they have to do almost intuitively. They don't have to be told because they know that that's what they need to do.
Yeah, I think as we've gone from, as I say, it's a relatively short time since we started doing these, but in that short period of time, we're now finding that we're going in and a lot of the checklist is compliant before we even get there. Now, we're not there to look at and say, wow, that's amazing, say all your first aid boxes are compliant or whatever, or recently, one of the big things is the CNR equipment compliance and all that. A lot of jails, there are there and it's up and in place. Now, I think that's alerting and everybody's starting to realise, well, this has come, we are all looking at this, so they are pre-looking before we're even getting there. And if that's what it's achieved, we've achieved the compliance before we're going, and we're just there, to possibly help with best practice, help with potentially how we follow on from this, and also put the local reps in touch with their local health and safety so they can work in partnership. And I think that's what it is achieving as well. It is achieving that partnership across the board.
But Roger, I think you found some common shortcomings on the visits you've been involved in.
But yeah, I think one of the most alarming things for me across the spectrum was a lack of knowledge, which doesn't cost anything, of the RMP for basic staff, the regime management plan. And in my own perception, I felt that some governors were quite happy with the sort of ignorance of the staff of what an RMP was, which allowed them to sort of more freely move away from it. So regimes weren't curtailed as they possibly should have been and have agreed to be between HMPPS and the POA when staffing is short.
If the RMP is in place and is being respected and properly resourced, that should make the health and safety inspection quite a straightforward exercise. Would that be a right thing to say?
It very much should be. I think the double-edged sword for a governor is they will tell the likes of myself on a safety inspection that the RMP is there, it's in place, it's right. When I walk out the door, what they get is, if you can imagine the crisis the service is in, where there are staffing shortages across the board, RMPs are being used much more frequently, I think, than they were ever designed to be because of the continuing staffing shortage, which obviously then impacts on regimes on a daily basis. So when auditors come in, when education auditors come in, healthcare auditors come in, and regimes are being closed down on a regular basis, they're then putting on the pressure on the governor to say why. So it's a double-edged sword for the governor. He doesn't want to close down the regime, but he knows the RMP is in place. He knows for someone like me, he has to say that the RMP is all encompassing and will be obeyed type of thing. When you talk to staff and you ask them general question, what is an RMP? Some staff genuinely, I've had everything, Royal Military Police. I honestly don't know. They genuinely do not know at a ground floor level what an RMP is. And that's alarming because it's not a new tool. It's something
Yes.
that's been around a long time.
Because, of course, the health and safety inspection regime doesn't take place in isolation from all the other challenges that are facing the service. And I wondered, Jason, what you saw as some of the most significant challenges that are facing you and your team and NEC colleagues as well in delivering this program.
I think, yeah, time. Jackie alluded to it. We have taken a step. I think the initial round of inspections were the management side were led very significantly from the central team, providing that support and leadership. This time around, we've started to move that to the regional leads taking the forefront from health and safety perspective on the management side. And actually, I think that has helped with the resourcing. So the central team still is involved, has the oversight, does the reporting back, helps to formulate the questions in partnership with the POA NEC, which is working very successfully. I think actually giving a greater role to regional health and safety leads has the benefit of not only them building their understanding and really participating and finding out what's happening within the prisons they have responsibility for, but also actually helps to build those relationships, which I think links through to the greater role that's being played by the POA within regions through the consultative committees. One of the greatest barriers you have is actually breaking down that first conversation you have. You're not sure what you're going to get. Actually, this is a way of breaking down those barriers as well. So it's achieving benefits in a lot of areas.
Do you feel, Jackie, that things like the inspectorate has cited staff shortages as being a barrier to fully achieving the objectives of the health and safety inspection regime. There's been the HSSIB has talked about inconsistent standards being a problem. Do you think these are things that actually are almost to be expected, and that so long as the inspections take place to time to a standard protocol, that's the best that can be done to encourage improvement in these other areas as well?
Wouldn't be any difference in sort of health and safety regardless of regime or anything else, health and safety is paramount for safety for everybody in the prison, staff, visitors and prisoners. So our levels don't change for that from prison to prison. Phil mentioned earlier on the CNR equipment. So we've had a big push for this year. And there are certain items, all the items in your CNR equipment, which is equipment PPE that's available every day, should staff need to deal with a violent prisoner in a cell. Everywhere has to have it, but there are dates on that equipment, and if those dates have gone, then it needs replacing. And we've found so many establishments have got out of date CNR equipment, which isn't good enough, because if you've got a shield there that's out of date, it could be hit, it could be shattered, which would then put the staff in danger. So we've had a big push on that, and like I say, everybody's responsible for that, and there's no different level at all. We expect every establishment, as does HMPPS, we expect every establishment to have in-date equipment.
Phil, does that mean that the wriggle room, if you like, for people who, for whatever reason, are having a problem about checking like all the equipment is in date still? Does that mean the wriggle room is getting really, really squeezed? There's nowhere for people to hide, if you like, for whatever, even if they've got every good intention, but they don't feel they're able, haven't got the resources for some reason to make sure everything's up to date. That's not going to be an excuse that's going to hold water anymore. They've got to come on board.
Yeah, it isn't an excuse. Like I say, it's health and safety. It is the law, and it is all about a safe environment for self. It can't be, like I say, it cannot be achieved just by paperwork. It's got to be achieved when staff and management work together. When staff and management were honest, we identify the risks and we act. We act, appropriately, so people don't get hurt. So there is no wriggle room.
And Jason, I suppose the benefit of establishing a health and safety culture, a collaborative culture, you and your managerial colleagues must see benefits to that in other areas as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we work in partnership with trade union colleagues, and I think we see momentum in the work that we pick up and seek to resolve any issues with. We take, Jackie alluded to earlier on, we have quite a lot of conversations on a regular basis around the issues as we see them. Doesn't mean we always agree on absolutely everything, but generally we understand where we don't agree. And in the main, we generally do have issues that we spot. The point that Jackie raised around PPE, that we have a shared understanding of the requirements around that from HMPPS side as well as a POA side. So actually, we then can look around how we solve the problem, what's driving that issue, and how can we make sure we're really clear on what the expectations are. So that involved quite a number of stakeholders to come up with the communications around to make that absolutely crystal clear. So, I think in that as an example is a way where we've worked together. We continue to do that across a range of issues, and actually that cultural shift to that closer working relationship right across the piece, whether that's us with the union, us with operational colleagues. Actually, health and safety is part and parcel of everything we do. It isn't an add-on. It should be integrated fully, and that's what we strive to achieve every time we have those conversations.
Yeah, so one example of where we work together in particular is about this CNR equipment. Because for governors to replace the equipment, it's costing tens of thousands of pounds. And obviously they are thinking, where am I going to get the budget from? Whereas Jason sort of knows the answer to that. So National Health and Safety have put a bulletin out for all governors so they know which budget to use to get this equipment. And, it's not a tight budget. The budget is there for them to use, to make the prison safer. So I thought that was a really good bit of working together.
For sure, because I suppose the main challenge that sits above all of this is that the inspections can reveal some real gaps in health and safety provision and gaps between what is and what needs to be. But fixing those can be really complicated, not straightforward at all. So I would agree, Jackie, that that's a great example of these things working. Now, partnership is a major feature of the new health and safety inspection regime. But, Roger, what would you say is the value of this to the POA as a union?
Well, I think it's given the POA a much more ground floor look. We sometimes, as an NEC, are slightly outside that. You know, you're getting in. I myself, I think I've been to 4 sites, 2 as an assist and 2 within my own area, and it's getting you back onto the ground floor to see it. The pleasing things that I've seen just on those initial visits, because I've not done any follow-up visits yet, little things. We were in one prison, without naming names, but due to building work, there was a temporary CNR unit being put up, a store. It was basically a metal container. As we were shown around it, the entrance to it had no visible step and it was on grass. But when we went in daylight, it became obvious to us that there was no light in there. By the time we left on the second day, they'd actually instructed the works to place a step in, a concrete step, so you weren't facing the hazard of slipping as you entered it in the evening, say, on a night state. And when you went in, they were proudly telling us that they managed to obtain from B&Q some light sensors on a battery. So for me, I left that inspection thinking, being here today has made a real difference, because if there's a call for kit at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning in that establishment, staff aren't going blundering around in the dark, potentially for succumbing to injury before they even get to the situation because of the state of the CNR room. I went to my own establishment, Liverpool, and I walked into the CNR room there. I've served 35 years at that establishment. I've known that kit room throughout that time. I had never seen it in such pristine condition as the day I walked in as an auditor and not as a member of Liverpool staff. Pieces of equipment still wrapped, new, ready to use. We'd use stuff that had done more service than me in helmets and shields, and so you walked out thinking, just being here, just the emphasis on the union looking on as well, it made it feel like there was a lot more happening. There was a lot more real emphasis on getting this right.
If you're a member and you're listening to this and you're headquartered in an establishment that hasn't yet been inspected, you're probably gonna be thinking, "Well, that's great if you've had an inspection, but there's no sign of an inspection in our place, and it's terrible." Is there a schedule that eventually means all of the public sector prisons will be covered by an inspection?
There's not a schedule as such at the moment because we've just done this round of inspections. So each governor will receive an action plan, and they need to complete that action plan if possible within 3 months. There will be the odd thing that they won't be able to do,
Mm.
but they need to be working on it. So once they're all done, then we will move on to another set of establishments. And because we're only doing sort of 12 a year, it would take us 10 years. But if we have got people, members there who their prison hasn't had an establishment, they can always speak to their committee. And we can send the committee a checklist if they want, and they can get the POA rep having a look at, what's compliant with the checklist. And if it's really bad and there's hardly anything compliant, they can then speak to their NEC rep, and we will speak to National Health and Safety.
Well, that's great. Yeah, you've anticipated my next question, which is what can local reps and members do to kind of fast track the process or to flag any concerns? Phil, in terms of individual POA members and their role in this, how can they input into the process?
All POA members, like I say, are responsible for their own health and safety. So anything they identify, and as Jackie's just said, they need to get in touch with local committees who will feed back through consultative committees. And going back to the previous point, when we go and do an inspection, I went into a one recently, you can tell there's already joint working going on with that local committee. So and I've done, I did 2 in a week, and chalk and cheese comes to mind. And I will say, I've only had this happen to us once where we've had a negatively received by governor of the establishment, and that goes for both ourselves and the regional lead. So it was even negativity towards that. But that I will say that has only ever happened to me once. Followed up by a one 2 days later by another governor who welcomed us with open arms and said, "Please tell me what is wrong with my prison if you see anything, because I need to learn." And to be fair, that inspection was done in just a day and a quarter because it was compliant with a lot, but that was through joint working with the local committee and also empowerment of his staff across the board, not just reps.
That's again a very, very positive feedback. Jason, what's the position for private sector prisons? Are they subject to an entirely different regime, or are they looking across to what HMPPS is doing and thinking, "Oh, yeah, we should do that"?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things within that, I guess. I think, just to pick up on the point made earlier on, we can't go and do these inspections at every single prison in a heartbeat. There just isn't the time and resource to do it. But what we do with each of these is actually when the inspection sheets are designed and delivered, they're shared right across the health and safety community within HMPPS so that they understand what it is
Yeah.
we've identified as the areas we need to focus on. It gives them the opportunity to pick up and actually take steps to review their position proactively. Additionally, learning that comes out from this. So, where we're identifying things that aren't right, where we think there's best practice, we're able to discuss those in the Whitley subcommittee for health and safety and also within the safety forums for the management team. So people get that shared understanding. Within private sector prisons, my team undertake audits within those sites at the moment. They are generally done with a range of individuals, and I guess whether there's scope to include those prisons within the joint approach, the commitment for public sector prisons was given by HMPPS's senior leaders. So that's an area we would have to explore offline to understand that, but they do have an audit regime and it is part of the contractual arrangement. So HMPPS keeps a contractual eye and has support of health and safety team to ensure that standards are being met.
And of course, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, the legal obligation to have safe systems of work is equal across the piece.
Absolutely. The thing that I'd like to add is actually, I think even the fact that we're having a podcast for the membership with a HMPPS health and safety person and POA NEC health and safety people talking about health and safety actually is a marker of where we've moved to. There's not many organisations that have that sort of spotlight on in that way in sort of difficult times and resourcing issues, etc. So I think it's an indication that we're certainly heading in the right direction and looking to work greater in partnership going forwards.
From my point of saying, like, obviously, the reason why these are a good idea and why they work is because our ranks, our badges, our management structures are literally left at the gate when we walk through them gates. And what we're looking at is obviously the joint approach. We're not looking to tick boxes and hit targets. What we're looking for is a safe, decent environment and working conditions for both staff, prisoners, and everybody.
And I think last word to you, Roger, to sum up the importance of this to each and every POA member.
For me, it's the old adage of being on the plane, isn't it? When they talk about the mask dropping, and if you're with a child, put your own on first, and you think, why would I do that? The obvious reason is if I'm safe, the child has every chance to survive. And I say this with staff, getting staff safety right gives everyone in the prison the chance to survive. The prisoners, the governors, the visitors. If the staff are there, if the staff are safe, there's every chance that prison will be a successful operation. And it's pushing that point. The biggest alarm to me, walking around the establishments I have, and not all of them, but in a lot of them, is the lack of knowledge on things like RMP and what that means to staff. That's a real grassroots issue, which I'm sort of really banging the drum about now on an NEC level, because I think, again, my own suspicions are governors are quite happy for that ignorance to be there. A lack of understanding doesn't put as much pressure on them, whereas if the staff know that, and in my own branches now, I'm really pushing that. Look, have your meetings. I will come in. I will speak to you. What you need to do to raise it if it is a concern. But ask the governor about training days. How many training days have you had that has encompassed RMP understanding? I know the answer. It'll be zero because the governor doesn't want there to be that understanding. But otherwise, no. I think it feels like from sort of 5 or 6 months on the union, one of the most positive things I've been involved with. And I'm just hoping now that I can get back to certainly the branches that I've been involved with to see the further improvements as well as the sort of instant ones that we saw on the day that were quick fixes for them.
My thanks to NEC members Jackie Marshall, Phil Hannant, Roger Moran, and HMPPS's Jason Morley. More information on health and safety and the full range of the union's work on behalf of its members can be found at poauk.org.uk, where there is also all the information you need on joining the union should you not already be a member. Thank you for listening. We hope you have enjoyed what you have heard and will join us for the next episode of the POA podcast. Thank you and goodbye.